The Mystery and Romance of Alchemy and Pharmacy. By C. J. S. Thompson. 1897, Chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7. The Philosopher's Stone. The dominating ambition of the early alchemists was to discover the unknown. In the same spirit the modern worker in science gropes onward, and dreams of discovering some contribution towards solving the elixir of life, in the form, it may be, of conquering at least one fell disease. The ancient workers in alchemy confined their researches almost exclusively to metals. They believed that all natural things were composed of four elements, which they termed fire, air, earth, and water. When these four elements are conjoined, says Roger Bacon, in his Radix Mundi, they become another thing, whereas it is evident that all things in nature are composed of the said elements being altered and changed. But the patient researches of the alchemists were not so much due to a love for scientific investigation as to the overwhelming desire to gain wealth. The majority had two fixed objects in view as the goals of their ambition, one being the discovery of some body that would be capable of transmuting the baser metals into gold and silver, and the other, the discovery of an elixir which would prolong the span of human life to an indefinite period. Both these objects seem to have been sought for by man from prehistoric times, and their origin is lost in antiquity. Berthelot remarks that the term philosopher's stone does not occur in writings earlier than the 7th century. Although the central idea is much more ancient, the philosopher's stone was sought for by the Chinese philosophers at a very remote period, afterwards by the Greeks, Arabs, and others down to the 17th century. Men of undoubted ability and genius wasted both their lives and their fortunes over the search for this elusive chimera, and others condescended to fraud and trickery of the meanest description in its pursuit. Apparently no alchemist of any repute thought it right to die until he had at least claimed to have solved one of these great problems. Thus claimants to the discovery were numerous. The descriptions given of the various processes in ancient manuscripts and works for producing the philosopher's stone are usually of a very elaborate description, and couched in the most fantastic language. Failure to produce the desired result was invariably accounted for by the omission to carry out some minute detail. Some who professed to have discovered the secret demanded large sums of money to reveal it, and several visited the various courts of Europe to demonstrate it by means of trickery and conjuring. The notorious Dr. Dee, who flourished in the time of Queen Elizabeth, was one of the last claimants to the discovery, and is said to have received immense sums of money from dupes for imparting the coveted secret, which he demonstrated by means of an ingenious trick. Realgar, mercury, sulfur, and many other substances were credited with the magical property of transmutation. In the illustration, which is taken from an authentic engraving of the 16th century, we have a figure of the apparatus used for distilling the water of life. The process for which is described by Gesnerus in the New Jewel of Health, printed in 1576. The alchemist, arrayed in his imposing robes, is depicted giving instructions to his assistant as to certain precautions to be taken in conducting the process. Bacon states that sulfur and mercury are the mineral roots and natural principles upon which nature herself acts and works in the mines and caverns of the earth. The latter metal he believed to be the true elixir of the philosopher's stone. Others, including Rhazes and Merlin, believed it to be an amalgam of gold and mercury, fantastically called the Red Man and his White Wife. Concerning the vessels for producing this citron body, as Bacon calls it, the most exact precautions were taken. Special apparatus was used, and a special heat, which was not to exceed the heat of the body. For this purpose horse dung was employed. Senior, the philosopher, says, dig a sepulchre and bury the woman, mercury, with her man, gold, in horse dung. The fire of the philosopher, until such time as they be conjoined. Bacon's definition of alchemy was, alchemy is the art or science teaching how to make or generate a certain kind of medicine which is called the elixir. It teaches how to transmute all kinds of metals, one with another, and this by a proper medicine. George Ripley, a monk, in 1476, thought that he had discovered the much coveted stone in pure sulfur. He says, let the two sulfurs, viz., the white and the red, be mingled with the oil of the white elixir that they may work the more strongly. And you shall have the highest medicine in the world to heal and cure human bodies, and to transmute the bodies of metals into the most pure fine gold and silver. Berthelot, who has made an exhaustive study of the subject, comes to the conclusion that the doctrines of alchemy concerning the transmutation of metals did not originate in the philosophical views of the constitution of matter as generally supposed, but in the practical experiments of goldsmiths occupied in making fraudulent substitutes for the precious metals. One cannot but think with pity of the immense labor expended and lost in the attempt made by many of these pioneers of science in their pursuit after this chemical chimera. Paracelsus, as well as his predecessors, labored studiously to discover some method for prolonging life. Like Bacon and Verulam, he maintained that the human body could be rejuvenated to a certain extent by a fresh supply of vitality, and it was his aim to find means by which such a supply could be obtained. In one of his works he gives the following reasons for this belief: metals may be preserved from rust and wood may be protected against rot. Blood may be preserved a long time if the air is excluded. Egyptian mummies have kept their form for centuries without undergoing putrefaction. Animals awaken from their winter sleep, and flies having become torpid from cold become nimble again when they are warmed. Therefore, if inanimate objects can be kept from destruction, why should there be no possibility to preserve the life essence of animate forms? For this purpose he prepared a remedy he called prima mens melici, which was made by dissolving pure carbonate of potass, and macerating in the liquid the fresh leaves of the melissa plant. On this absolute alcohol was poured several times in successive portions to absorb the coloring matter, after which it was collected, distilled, and evaporated to the thickness of a syrup. The second great secret elixir of Paracelsus was his prima mens sanguinis. This was prepared by mixing blood from the medium vein of a healthy young person, and digesting it in a warm place with twice its quantity of alkahest. After which the red fluid was to be separated from the sediment, filtered, and preserved. The alkahest was his celebrated universal medicine, and was considered the greatest mystery of all. It was made with freshly prepared caustic lime and absolute alcohol. These were distilled together 10 times. The residue left in the retort was mixed with pure carbonate of potass and dried. This was again distilled with alcohol. It was then placed in a dish and set on fire, and the residue that remained was the alkahest. The following lines were found inscribed on the fly-leaf of an old work on alchemy, printed in 1550, and signed, Philo Veritas, Elixir Vitae, when fire and water, earth and air, in love's true bond united are, for all diseases then be sure, you have a safe and certain cure. I will affirm it's here alone, exists the philosophic stone, this is fair nature's virgin root, thrice blessed are they who reap the fruit, but oh! Where one true adept's found, 10,000 cheats abound. In an ancient work in the library of York Minster, the writer came across the following in manuscript, signed, Raymond Lully. Remember man that is the most noble creature in composition that ever God wrought, in whom be 4 elements proportioned by nature, a neutral mercurialite which costeth right not, out of his money by Monnier it is bought, and our money be not all but our oxtal tau, of the sun and the moon, which Raymond said so. Chapter 8. The Black Art and Occult Sciences. To make a thorough analysis of this interesting subject, and trace the origin of magic, would take much more space than we have at our command, and we can only mention a few of the many forms which may be grouped under the head of the occult sciences, and those especially which had any connection with the alchemists. There is little doubt that most of the alchemists were students, if not practitioners, of magic or some of its branches. The antiquity of magic is very great, and we have record of magicians and wise men in early Jewish times, as well as the magic formulae of the Vedas in India, as handed down to us in the religion of the Hindus. Moreover, magic was practiced by the Chaldeans, of whom a certain tribe devoted their energies to studying the occult sciences. Pliny tells us of the dealings in the supernatural in the time of Homer, and other writers record that magic was also known to the Etruscans and Assyrians at a very early period. As time rolled on, the different forms of magic practiced became specialized according to their several natures. For instance, there were astrology and oneiromancy, which comprised the various forms of divination, theurgy and goetry, the art of evoking good or evil spirits, necromancy, by means of which communication was held with the dead, and sorcery, which exercised its power by the influence of dreams. The longings after the supernatural and unknown felt by the great ignorant masses brought forth individuals in plenty to take advantage of their credulity. During the 13th and 14th centuries the occult sciences were openly taught in the universities and schools, and 200 years later reached the zenith of their influence, and practitioners of astrology and the black arts abounded and flourished throughout Europe. The professors of oneiromancy were those who divined or interpreted dreams, and founded their traditions in the art from its being in accordance with the scriptures. The explanation of dreams also did not go counter to the doctrines of the Church, and so the cult found many believers among all classes of society. It was denounced by Pope Gregory II as a detestable practice, but this did not prevent it being largely employed in forecasting the future. Arnauld de Villeneuve, who wrote a work on the subject in the 13th century, gives a certain code by which those who practiced it worked. Whoever dreamt that his hair was thick and carefully curled would soon become wealthy. If anything was wrong with the hair, evil was betokened. It also foreshadowed harm if a wreath was worn composed of flowers that were not in season. Other codes signified that to dream of the eyes, related to children, the head, to a father, the arms, to brothers, the feet, to servants, the right hand, to the mother, to sons, and to friends, and the left hand, to the wife and daughter. Another method was founded on the theory that whatever was dreamt of, the antithesis or opposite would follow in life. From this we have probably the saying common today, dream of a wedding and it is a sign of a funeral. According to many old writers there was scarcely any important event in the Middle Ages which was not announced by a dream. The day before Henry II was struck by the blow of a lance during a tournament, Catherine de Medicis, his wife, dreamt that she saw him lose one of his eyes. 3 days before he fell by the knife of Jacques Clement. Henry III dreamt he saw the royal insignia stained with blood and trodden underfoot by monks and people of the lower orders. Henry IV also, before he was murdered by Ravaillac, it is said, heard during the night his wife Marie de Medicis say to herself as she woke, "Dreams are but falsehoods," and when he asked her what she had dreamt, she replied, "That you were stabbed upon the steps of the Little Louvre." "Thank God it is but a dream," rejoined the king. The necromancers, who were supposed to be able to conjure up spirits and raise the dead, were accounted on a somewhat higher plane than the interpreters of dreams. They also based their authority on the Old Testament. The nature of the art was gruesome and awe-inspiring, and there is little doubt many dark deeds were perpetrated by those who practiced it. One method of evocation was to kill a child and place its head upon a dish surrounded by lighted candles. The desired spirit was supposed to enter this ghastly object and speak through its mouth. Sometimes the spirit simply consisted of some muttered words from behind a curtain in a dark cellar. Another method was to cause the appearance of a sepulchral figure out of smoke or vapor, which would indicate by gesture and reply to questions asked. To evoke a dead man's spirit, it was necessary to go to the grave at midnight with a companion who bore a candle in the left hand and a crystal stone in the right, the conjurer holding a hazel wand with the name of God written on it, and repeating the words Tetragrammaton plus Adonai plus Agla plus Kraton plus. Then striking 3 times on the ground, with a prayer he commanded the spirit into the stone. When it appeared in the shape of a child, the conjurer often wore a girdle of lion's skin with the name of God written on it, and the Solomon's circle he described with a bright knife, on the blade of which were written certain mystic words. Necromancy gradually merged into sorcery, which has occasionally come to the surface in comparatively recent years. Chiromancy, the art of divining or foretelling future events from marks on the palm of the hand, was also practiced in antiquity, but in medieval times it was strongly opposed by the Church. The practice is supposed to have been brought into Europe from the East by the Bohemians in the early part of the 15th century. This art eventually merged into astrology, which exerted the greatest influence of all the occult sciences. The antiquity of astrology is very great, it having been originated by the Chaldeans. and was thought by some of the Jews to have been a method by which the Creator could communicate with his people. The art itself was based on astronomy, and, like alchemy, was the beginning of the study of real natural science. The teller of the stars was not only supposed to foretell forthcoming misfortunes to individuals, but also to forecast the destinies of kings and empires. The belief in its power was so great that it became the fashion among royal personages of the 16th century to keep their own special astrologers, who were lodged easy of access and loaded with honors and wealth. These men were mostly astute Jews well versed in the science of their time, and by means of their supposed powers they often played a very important part in the political affairs of the nation. Thus in the 15th century Rovigo, an astrologer of eminence, who is said to have perfected the astrolabe, was attached to the court of King John II of Portugal, and Simon Ferres figured at the court of France in the time of Charles VIII. We must not forget to mention Cosmo Ruggieri, the Florentine astrologer and the confidant of Catherine de' Medicis, also the celebrated Nostradamus, astrologer and trusted advisor of Charles IX. This extraordinary man played a prominent part in the history of his time, and was supposed to practice magic and alchemy as well as the healing art. He was consulted by the king in all positions of difficulty, and it is said became immensely wealthy. He died in 1566 at Ceylon, after having written several notable works. Thus concludes Chapter 8 of the Mystery and Romance of Alchemy and Pharmacy. Up next are Chapters 9 and 10, The Art of Fortune Telling, and Black Magic. Thanks for listening, and feel free to check out the plethora of selections at the Weird Audiobooks channel library. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing.